Today we're going to talk about Sasquatch or Bigfoot and abductions. Now, some of you probably heard some of these stories before, maybe not, but the first story I'm going to cover... Wait. That's cars. Bigfoot may not always be the friendly, gentle giants that some people like to portray them as. Although, personally, I do believe that, generally speaking, that they seem quite intelligent and quite nice. There are stories of them attacking people and abducting people. Probably one of the more famous stories about Bigfoot abductions is the story of Albert Ostman. I have always followed logging and construction work. This time, I had worked over 1 year at a construction job and thought a good vacation was in order. BC is famous for its lost gold mines. One is supposed to be at the head of the Toba Inlet. Why not look for this mine and have a vacation at the same time? I took the Union steamship boat to Lund, BC. From there, I hired an old Indian to take me from the head of Toba Inlet. This old Indian was a very talkative old gentleman. He told me stories about gold brought out by a white man from this lost mine. The white man was a very, very heavy drinker. He spent all his money freely at saloons, but he had no trouble getting more money. He would be away for a few days, then come back with a bag of gold. But one time he went to his mine and never came back. Some people said a Sasquatch had killed him. At that time, I had never heard of a Sasquatch, so I asked him what kind of animal he called a Sasquatch. The Indian said, "They have hair all over their bodies, but they are not animals. They are people, big people living in the mountains." My uncle saw the tracks of one that were 2 feet long. One old Indian saw one that was over 8 feet tall. I told the Indian that I didn't believe in their old fables about mountain giants. It might have been some 1,000 years ago, but not nowadays. The Indian said, "There may not be many, but they still exist." We arrived at the head of the inlet at about 4 p.m. I made camp at the mouth of the creek. The Indian had supper with me, and I told him to look out for me in about 3 weeks. I would be camping at the same spot when I came back. The next morning, I took my rifle with me, but left my equipment at the camp. I decided to look around for some deer trails to lead me up the mountains. On the way up to the inlet, I had seen a pass in the mountains that I wanted to go through to see what was on the other side. I spent most of the forenoon looking for a trail but found none, except for a hogback running down the beach. So I swamped out a trail from there, got back to my camp about 3 p.m. that afternoon, and made up my pack to be ready in the morning. My equipment consisted of a 30-30 Winchester rifle. I had a special homemade prospecting pick, axe on one end, pick on the other. I had a leather case for this pick, which fastened to my belt. Also my sheath knife. The storekeeper at Lund was a cooperative. He gave me some cans for my sugar, salt, and matches to keep them dry. My grub consisted mostly of canned stuff except for a side of bacon, a bag of beans, 4 pounds of prunes, and 6 packets of macaroni, cheese, 3 pounds of pancakes, and 4 and 6 pockets of Rye King hardtack. 3 rolls of snuff, 1 quart of sealer of butter, and 2 1-pound cans of milk. I had 2 boxes of shells for my rifle. The storekeeper gave me a biscuit tin. I put a few things in that and cached it under a windfall, so I'd have it when I came back here waiting for a boat to bring me out. My sleeping bag I rolled up and tied to the top of my pack sack, together with my ground sheet, small frying pan, and 1 aluminum pot that held about a gallon. As my canned food was used, I would get plenty of empty cans to cook with. The following morning, I had an early breakfast, made up my pack, and started out up this hogback. My pack must have been at least 80 pounds, besides my rifle. After 1 hour, I had to rest. I kept resting and climbing all that morning. At about 2 p.m., I came to a flat place below a rock bluff. There was a bunch of willow in one place. I made a wooden spade and started digging for water. About a foot down, I got seepings of water, so I decided to camp here for the night and scout out around for the best way to get on from here. I must have been up near 1,000 feet. There was a most beautiful view over the islands and the strait, tugboats with long booms and fishing boats going in all directions. A lovely spot. I spent the following day prospecting around, but no sign of minerals. I found a deer trail leading towards this pass that I had seen on my way up the inlet. The following morning I started out early while it was cool. It was a steep climb with my heavy pack. After a 3-hour climb, I was tired and stopped to rest. On the other side of the ravine from where I was resting was a yellow spot below some small trees. I moved over there and started digging for water. I found a small spring and made a small trough from cedar bark and got a small amount of water. Had my lunch and rested here till evening. I made it over the pass late that night. Now I was headed downhill and it was good going, but I was hungry and tired, so I camped at the first bunch of trees I came to. I was trying to size up the terrain, what direction I would take from here. Towards west would lead to a low and some other inlet, so I decided to go in a northeastern direction. I had been going on a slight downhill all day. I must have made at least 10 miles when I came to a small spring and a big black hemlock tree. This was a lovely campsite. I spent 2 days here just resting and prospecting. The first night here, I shot a small deer. 2 days later, I found an exceptionally good campsite. It was 2 good-sized cypress trees glowing close together and near a rock wall with a nice spring just below these trees. I intended to make this my permanent camp. I cut lots of brush from my bed between the trees. I rigged up a pole from this rock wall to hang my pack sack on, and I arranged some flat rocks for my fireplace for cooking. I had a really classy setup, and that is when things began to happen. I am a heavy sleeper. Not much disturbs me after I go to sleep, especially on a good bed like I had now. The next morning, I noticed things had been disturbed during the night, but nothing missing that I could see. I roasted my grouse on a stick for breakfast. That night, I filled up my magazine and my rifle. I still had 1 box full of 20 shells and 6 shells in my coat pocket. That night, I laid my rifle under the edge of my sleeping bag. I thought a porcupine had visited me in the night before, and porkies like leather, so I put my shoes in the bottom of my sleeping bag. The next morning, my pack sack had been emptied out. Someone had turned the sack upside down. It was still hanging on the pole from the shoulder straps as I had hung it up. Then I noticed 1/2 pound package of prunes was missing. Also, my pancake flour was missing, but my salt bag was not touched. Porcupines always look for salt, so I decided it must have been something else other than porcupines. I looked for tracks but found none. I did not think it was a bear. They always tear up and make a mess of things. I kept close to the camp these days in case this visitor would come back. I climbed up on a big rock where I had a good view of the camp, but nothing showed up. I was hoping it would be a porcupine, so I'd get a good porky stew. These visits have now been going on for 3 nights. This night it was cloudy and it looked like it might rain. I took special notice of how everything was arranged. I closed my pack sack. I did not undress, only took off my shoes, put them in the bottom of my sleeping bag. I drove my prospecting pick into one of the cypress trees so I could reach it from my bed. I also put my rifle alongside me inside my sleeping bag. I fully intended to stay awake all night to find out who my visitor was, but I must have fallen asleep. I was awakened by something picking me up. I was half asleep at first. I did not remember where I was. As I began to get my wits together, I remembered I was on this prospecting trip and in my sleeping bag. My first thought was, it must be a snowslide, but there was no snow around my camp. Then it felt like I was tossed on a horseback, but I could feel whoever it was walking. I tried to reason out what kind of animal this could be. I tried to get at my sheath knife and cut my way out, but I was in an almost sitting position and the knife was under me. I could not get a hold of it. But the rifle was in front of me. I had a good hold of that and had no intention to let go of it. At times, I could feel my pack sack touching me and could feel the cans on my sack touching my back. After what seemed like an hour, I could feel that we were going up a steep hill. I could feel myself rise for every step. What was carrying me was breathing hard sometimes and sometimes gave a slight cough. Now I knew this must be one of the mountain Sasquatch giants the Indian told me about. I was in a very uncomfortable position, unable to move. I was sitting on my feet, and one of the boots in the bottom of the bag was crossways with the hobnail sole up across my foot. It hurt me terribly, but I could not move. It was very hot inside. It was lucky for me that this fellow's hand was not big enough to close up the whole bag when he picked me up. There was a small opening at the top, otherwise I would have choked to death. Now he was going downhill. I could feel myself touching the ground at times, and at one time he was dragging me behind him, and I could feel he was below me. Then he seemed to get on level ground and was going at a trot for a long time. By this time I had cramps in my legs. The pain was terrible. I was wishing he would get to his destination soon. I could not stand this type of transportation for much longer. Now he was going uphill again. It did not hurt so bad. I tried to estimate distance and direction. As near as I could guess, we were about 3 hours traveling. I had no idea when he started, as I was asleep when he picked me up. Finally, he stopped and let me down. Then he dropped my pack sack. I could hear the cans rattle. Then I heard chatter, some kind of talk I did not understand. The ground was sloping, so when he let go of my sleeping bag, I rolled downhill. I got my head out and got some air. I tried to straighten my legs to crawl out, but my legs were numb. It was still dark. I could not see what my captors looked like. I tried to massage my legs to get some life into them and get my shoes on. I could hear now that it was at least 4 of them. They were standing around me and continuously chattering. I had never heard of Sasquatch before the Indian told me about them, but I knew I was right among them. But how to get away from them? That was another question. I got to see the outline of them now as it began to get lighter. The sky was cloudy and it looked like rain. In fact, there was a slight sprinkle. I now had circulation in my legs, but my foot was very sore on top where it had been resting on my hobnail boots. I got my boots out from my sleeping bag and tried to stand up. I found I was very wobbly on my feet, but I had a good hold of my rifle. I asked, "What do you fellows want with me?" Only some more chatter. It was getting lighter now, and I could see them quite clearly. I could make out forms of 4 people, 2 big and 2 little ones. They were all covered with hair and had no clothes on at all. I could now make out mountains all around me. I looked at my watch and it was 4:25 a.m. It was getting lighter now and I could see the people clearly. They looked like a family. Old man, old lady, 2 young ones, a boy and a girl. The boy and the girl seemed to be scared of me. The old lady did not seem too pleased about what the old man dragged home. But the old man was waving his arms and telling them all what he had in mind. They all left me then. I had my compress and my prospecting glass on a string around my neck, the compass on my left-hand shirt pocket, and my glass in my right-hand pocket. I tried to reason a location and where I was. I could see now that I was in a small valley or basin about 8 or 10 acres, surrounded by high mountains. On the southeast side, there was a V-shaped opening about 8 feet wide at the bottom and about 20 feet high at the highest point. That must be the way I came in, but how would I get out? The old man was now sitting near this opening. I moved my belongings up close to the west wall. There were 2 small cypress trees there, and this will do for a shelter for me for the time being, until I find out what these people want with me and how to get away from here. I emptied out my pack sack to see what I have left in the line of food. All my cans of meat and vegetables were intact, and I had 1 can of coffee. Also, 3 small cans of milk, 2 packages of Rye King hardtack, and my butter sealer was half full of butter. But my prunes and macaroni were missing. Also, my box full of shells for my rifle. I had my sheath knife, but my prospecting pick was missing and my can of matches. I only had my safety box full, and that held about a dozen matches. That did not worry me. I could always start a fire with my prospecting glass when the sun was shining if I got dry wood. I wanted hot coffee, but I had no wood and nothing around here looked like wood. I had a good look over the valley from where I was, but the boy and girl were always watching me from behind a juniper bush. I decided there must be some water around here. The ground was leaning towards the opening in the wall. There must be water at the upper end of this valley. There is green grass and moss along the bottom. All of my utensils were left behind. I opened my coffee tin and emptied the coffee into a dish towel and tied it with a metal strip from the can. I took my rifle and the can and went looking for water. Right at the head under the cliff, there was a lovely spring that disappeared underground. I got a drink and a full can of water. When I got back, the young boy was looking over my belongings, but did not touch anything. On my way back, I noticed where these people were sleeping. On the east side of the wall of the valley was a shelf in the mountainside with overhanging rock, looking something like a big undercut in a big tree about 10 feet deep and 30 feet wide. The floor was covered with a lot of dry moss, and they had some kind of blankets woven from narrow strips of cedar bark, packed with dry moss. They looked very practical and warm, with no need of washing. The first day, not much happened. I had to eat my food cold. The young fellow was coming nearer to me and seemed curious about me. My one snuff box was empty, so I rolled it towards him. When he saw it coming, he sprang up, quick as a cat, and grabbed it. He went over to his sisters and showed her. They found out how to open it and close it. They spent a long time playing with it. Then he trotted over to the old man and showed him. They had a long chatter. The next morning, I made in my mind, I'm going to leave this place, even if I had to shoot my way out. I could not stay much longer. I had only enough grub to last me until I got back to Toba Inlet. I did not know the direction, but I would go downhill and I would come out near civilization at some place. I rolled up my sleeping bag, put that inside my pack sack, packed the few cans I had, swung the sack on my back, injected the shell into the barrel of the rifle, and started for the opening of the wall. The old man got up, held up his hand as though he would push me back. I pointed to the opening. I wanted to go out, but he stood there pushing towards me and said something that sounded like, "Soka, soka." I backed up about 60 feet. I did not want to be too close. I thought if I had to shoot my way out, a 30-30 might not have much effect on this fellow. It might make him mad. I only had 6 shells, so I decided to wait. There must be a better way than killing him. In order to get out from here, I went back to my campsite to figure out some other way to get out. I could make friends with the young fellow or the girl. They might help me. If I could only talk to them. Then I thought of a fellow who saved himself from a mad bull by blinding him with snuff in his eyes. But how would I get near enough to this fellow to put snuff in his eyes? So I decided next time I give this young fellow my snuff box to leave a few grains of the snuff in it. He might give it to the old man to taste it. But the question is, in what direction will I go if I should get out? I must have been near 25 miles northeast of Toba Inlet, and I was kidnapped. This fellow must have traveled at least 25 miles in the 3 hours he carried me. If he went west, he would be near the salt water. Same thing if he went south. Therefore, he must have gone northeast. If I then kept going south and over the mountains, I must hit salt water someplace between Lund and Vancouver. The following day, I did not see the old lady till about 4 p.m. She came home with her arms full of grass and twigs and all kinds of spruce and hemlock, as well as some kind of nuts that grow in the ground. I have seen lots of them on Vancouver Island. The young fellow went up the mountains to the east every day. He could climb better than a mountain goat. He picked some kind of grass with long, sweet roots. He gave me some one day. They tasted very sweet. I gave him another snuff box with about a teaspoon of snuff in it. He tasted it and went to the old man. He licked it with his tongue. They had a long chat. I made a dipper from a milk can. I made many dippers. You can use them for pots too. You cut 2 slits near the top of the can, then cut a limb from any small tree. Cut down the back of the limb down to the stem of the tree, then taper the part you cut from the stem. Then cut a hole in the tapered part, slide the tapered part in the slit you have made in the can, and you have a good handle on your can. I threw one over to the young fellow that was playing near my camp. He picked it up and looked at it. Then he went to the old man and showed it to him. They had a long chatter. Then he came to me, pointed at the dipper, then at his sister. I could see that he wanted one for her too. I had other peas and carrots, so I made one for his sister. He was standing only 8 feet away from me when I made the dipper. I dipped it in the water and drank from it. He was very pleased, almost smiled at me. Then I took a chew of snuff, smacked my lips, said, "That's good." The young fellow pointed to the old man, said something that sounded like ook. I got the idea that the old man liked snuff, and the young fellow wanted a box for the old man. I shook my head. I motioned with my hands for the old man to come to me. I do not think the young fellow understood what I meant. He went to his sister and gave her the dipper I made for her. They did not come near me again that day. I had now been here 6 days, but I was sure I was making progress. If only I could get the old man to come over to me, to get him to eat a full box of snuff that would kill him for sure, and that way, kill himself. I wouldn't be guilty for murder. The old lady was a meek old thing. The young fellow, by this time, was quite friendly. The girl would not hurt anybody. Her chest was flat like a boy's, no development like a young lady's. I am sure if I can get the old man out of the way, I could easily brought this girl with me to civilization. But what good would that have been? I would have to keep her in a cage for public display. I don't think we have any right to force our way of life on other people, and I don't think they would have liked it. I don't think they would like the noise and racket of a modern city no more than I do. The young fellow might have been between 11 to 18 years old and about 7 feet tall and might have weighed 300 pounds. His chest would have been 50 to 55 inches, his waist about 36 to 38 inches. He had a wide jaw, narrow forehead that slanted upward around the back about 4 or 5 inches higher than the forehead. The hair on their heads was about 6 inches long. The hair on the rest of their bodies was short and thick in places. The woman's hair on the forehead had an upward turn like some women have. They call it bangs among women's hairdos nowadays. The old lady could have been anything between 40 to 70 years old. She was over 7 feet tall. She would have been about 500 to 600 pounds. She had very wide hips and a goose-like walk. She was not built for beauty or speed. Some of those lovable braziers and uplifters would have been a great improvement on her look and her figure. The man's eye teeth were longer than the rest of the teeth, but not long enough to be called tusk. The old man had been near 8 feet tall, big barrel chest, and a big hump on his back. Powerful shoulders. His biceps and upper arms were enormous and tapered down to his elbows. His forearms were longer than common people have, but well proportioned. His hands were wide and his palms were long and broad and hollow like a scoop. His fingers were short in proportion to the rest of his hands. His fingernails were like chisels. The only place that had no hair was the inside of their hands and the soles of their feet and upper part of their nose and eyelids. I never did see their ears. They were covered with hair hanging over them. If the old man was to wear a collar, it would have been about 30 inches. I have no idea what size shoes they would need. I was watching the young fellow's foot one day when he was sitting down. The soles of his feet seemed to be padded like a dog's foot, and the big toe was longer than the rest and very strong. In mountain climbing, all he needed was footing and his big toe. They were very agile. To sit down, they turned their knees out and came straight down. To rise, they came straight up without the help of hands or arms. I don't think this valley was their permanent home. I think they moved from place to place as food is available in different locations. They might eat meat, but I never saw them eat meat or do any cooking. I think this was probably a stopover place, and the plants with sweet roots on the mountainside might have been in season this time of year. They seemed to be most interested in them. The roots had a very sweet and satisfying taste. They always seemed to do everything for a reason, wasted no time on anything they did not need. When they were not looking for food, the old man and the old lady were resting, but the boy and the girl were always climbing something or some other exercise. A favorite position was to take hold of his feet with his hands and balance on his rump, then bounce forward. The idea seemed to see how far I can go without using his feet or hands touching the ground. Sometimes he made 20 feet. But what do they want with me? They must understand I cannot stay here indefinitely. I will soon have to make a break for freedom. Not that I was mistreated in any way. One consolation was that the old man was coming closer each day and was very interested in my snuff. Watching me when I take a pinch of the snuff, he seemed to think it useless to only put it inside my lips. One morning after I had breakfast, both the old man and the boy came and sat down only 10 feet away from me. This morning I made coffee. I had saved up all the dry branches I found, and I had some dry moss, and I used the labels of my cans to start a fire. I got my coffee pot boiling, and it was a strong coffee too, and the aroma from boiling coffee was what brought them over. I was sitting eating hardtack with plenty of butter on and sipping coffee, and it sure tasted good. I was smacking my lips, pretending it was better than it really was. I set the can down that was about half full. I intended to warm it up later. I pulled out a box of snuff, took a big chew. Before I had time to close the box, the old man reached for it. I was afraid he would waste it, and only had 2 more boxes. So I held onto the box, intending for him to take a pinch like I had just done. Instead, he grabbed the box and emptied it in his mouth, swallowed it in one gulp, and licked the box inside with his tongue. After a few minutes, his eyes began to roll over in his head. He was looking straight up. I could see he was sick. Then he grabbed my coffee can that was quite cold by this time. He emptied it in his mouth, grounds and all. That did no good. He stuck his head between his legs and rolled forward a few times away from me. Then he began to squeal like a stuck pig. I grabbed my rifle and said to myself, this is it. If he comes for me, I'll shoot him plumb between his eyes. But he started to the spring. He wanted water. I packed my sleeping bag in my pack sack with a few cans I had left. The young fellow ran over to his mother. Then she began to squeal. I started for the opening of the wall, and I just made it. The old lady was right behind me. I fired one shot at the rock over her head. I guess she had never seen a rifle before. She turned and ran inside the wall. I injected another shell into the barrel of my rifle and started downhill, looking back over my shoulder every so often to see if they were coming. I was in a canyon and good traveling, and I made fast time. Must have been about 3 miles in some world record. I came to a turn in the canyon and had the sun on my left. That meant I was going south. The canyon turned west. I decided to climb the ridge ahead of me. I knew that it must have been the mountain ridges between me and saltwater. By climbing this ridge, I'd have a good view of the canyon, so I could see if the Sasquatch were coming after me. I had a light pack and was making good time up the hill. I stopped soon after to look back down where I came from, but nobody followed me. As I came over the ridge, I could see Mount Baker. Then I knew I was going in the right direction. I was hungry and tired and opened my pack sack to see what I had to eat. I decided to rest here for a while. I had a good view of the mountainside, and if the old man was coming, I had the advantage because I was up above him. To get me, he would have to come up a steep hill, and that might not be so easy. After stopping for a few 30-30 bullets, I had made up my mind that this was my last chance, and this would be a fight to the finish. I rested here for 2 hours. It was 3 p.m. when I started down the mountainside. It was nice going, not too steep and not too much underbrush. When I got near the bottom, I shot a big blue grouse. She was sitting in a windfall looking at me, only 100 feet away. I shot her neck right off. I made it down the creek at the bottom of the canyon. I felt it was safe now. I made a fire between 2 big boulders, roasted the grouse. The next morning I woke up, I was feeling terrible. My feet were sore from dirty socks, my legs were sore, my stomach was upset from the grouse I ate the night before, and I was not too sure if I was going to make it up the mountain. I finally made it to the top, but it took me 6 hours to get there. It was cloudy, visibility about a mile. I knew I had to go downhill. After about 2 hours, I got down to the heavy timber and sat down to rest. I could hear a motor running, hard at times, then stop. I listened to this for a while and decided the sound was from a gas donkey. Someone was logging in the neighborhood. I told them I was a prospector and was lost. I did not like to tell them that I had been kidnapped by Sasquatch. If I had told them, they probably would have thought I was crazy. The following day, I went down from this camp on Salmon Arm Branch, Seachlet Inlet. From there, I got to the Union boat back to Vancouver. That was my last prospecting trip and my only experience with what is known as Sasquatches. I know that in 1924, there were 4 Sasquatches living. It might only be 2 now. The old man, the old lady might be dead by this time. In this story, the Bigfoot family didn't seem to be very cruel or mean. They actually seemed kind of curious. And if you notice, when he first brought the human to their home, he had to argue with his wife and explain to her, like he had a long talk, trying to explain to her his reasoning for bringing a human to their camp. And to me, it kind of seemed like the Bigfoot was interested in making communication or first contact with the person, but it's hard to say. Definitely some interesting points and observations that he made about the people, like their hands were scoop-like, so maybe that's how they drink their water. Their hands have a large scoop or a more pronounced indentation in the palm for holding water. And they obviously seem intelligent. Like, they live in small family units, at least this family did, and they're able to communicate with language to each other. And Albert Ostman seemed to have thought of them as people, just like giants, mountain giants. He didn't really think of them as animals because the way they talked and the way they treated him. They definitely weren't cruel, they definitely weren't mean. But not all stories of Bigfoot abductions are friendly. Here's some other truly strange stories of abduction by Bigfoot. The strange abduction of Albert Ostman is certainly not the only case of alleged kidnapping by Bigfoot. And these sorts of accounts go back a very long time and do not always take place in North America. In 1602, a 17-year-old Antoinette Coulette was herding animals near the village of Naves, France, when she inexplicably vanished. No sign was found of the missing woman until later that year, when a group of lumberjacks claimed to have heard the voice of Coulette calling them out from beyond a boulder blocking the entrance to a cave, and explaining that she had been kidnapped by an ugly, hairy monster with superhuman strength, which regularly brought her baskets of bread and fruit. That very same night, the creature is said to have wandered into a nearby village and was shot. It was described as looking like a rather human-like bear. The late 19th century also brought with it several other stories of abductions that carried out by hairy humanoids. One such account was from a lumberjack named Bourne, who claimed to have been kidnapped by a tall, hairy humanoid, about 8 feet in height, with long brown hair, as if he had been on his way to meet his fiancée in the district of Isère, in France. Bourne claimed that a creature had slung him over his shoulder and brought him to a cave populated by similar beasts, all of which chattered with each other in some strange language. Bourne claimed to have been held captive in the cave for about an hour before he was able to distract the creatures and escape. One such bizarre kidnapping was a 17-year-old young woman named Stephanie Long, who, in 1871, was reportedly forcibly abducted by a large male Bigfoot while hiking at Morris Mountains in British Columbia, Canada. According to the victim, she was held captive by the Bigfoot and his family for about a year, during which time she claims to have been raped by the large male, before the abductor suddenly dumped her back to the place from which she had disappeared. Not long after this, it was claimed that she gave birth to a deformed baby. Interestingly, this is not the only tale of a Bigfoot abductor seemingly looking for an amorous relationship with humans. In a more modern account, one 19-year-old woman named Oksana was apparently kidnapped by a hairy wild man after she had become lost in the wilderness. As she stopped to pick some raspberries to eat, the young woman claimed that she had heard a chuffing noise and looked to see a strange creature that looked like an orangutan. The girl apparently screamed and passed out, after which she came to in a cave with the sounds of a stream nearby and rays of light piercing down through the darkness from above. The strange ape-like creature was sitting next to her with his teeth bared in a mockery of a smile. It then reportedly set upon her and ripped her clothes off, after which she lost consciousness once again. When Oksana awoke again, she realized that she was in prison, and that she had become the wife of the creature. Whenever it left the cave, it would roll an immense heavy boulder across the entrance of the cave to prevent her escape, and would typically return with berries and raw meat for her to eat. The creature apparently showed interest in the girl's CD player and would listen to the songs on it through the headphones. He apparently became very upset when the device inevitably ran out of batteries and threw it quite a tantrum. The creature, which Oksan had named Tang, then went out for a while and came back with a fresh pack of batteries, which she surmised he had stolen from the store. This gave hope to Oksan that perhaps the cave was not far from civilization, giving her hope that a future to escape would be possible. As the seasons changed and the weather grew colder, Tang would bring her warm clothing from some unknown source. Intriguingly, this would later be backed up by the report of a tractor driver, who bizarrely claimed to have had his clothes stolen by a wild man. When Oksana made a fire in the cave, Tang was purportedly fascinated by the flames and somewhat frightened by them at the same time, as if he had never seen such a thing before, although he would eventually overcome his fear and sit next to her by the fire. When Oksana caught a cold, Tang dutifully went out into the wilderness and brought back what seemed to be medicinal roots and plants. One day in spring, Tang left the cave on an errand, and this time did not close the boulder as tightly as usual. Oksana was able to squeeze her way through the opening and make it outside, where she made a daring escape. When she made her way back to civilization, she realized she had been held captive for about a year. Mentally unbalanced by the whole ordeal, unable to fully adjust to normal life, she was admitted to a mental hospital where she relayed her amazing story to her doctor.
When no one would believe her, Oksana allegedly fell into a deep depression and began telling people that the creature knew where she was and would come back for her. One day, the girl apparently just suddenly disappeared from her room, and other patients would purportedly claim that a large hairy beast had come to get her during the night. It is unclear just how much of the story is true, but it is certainly intriguing nevertheless. In another report, this time from 1920, a young couple was tending animals in the Sierra Morena Mountains in Spain when the woman was apparently abducted by an ape-like creature and she was washing clothes by a stream. She was then kept captive by a creature and repeatedly raped, and when she finally managed to escape and make her way back home, she purportedly gave birth to a strange hairy child who would be called Annika and nicknamed the daughter of the orangutan. Apparently, the baby was deformed with long arms and a hairy body with an ape-like mouth. There are several other accounts of Bigfoot kidnappings in the 1920s. In 1928, a Native American trapper was in British Columbia, Canada, when he claimed to have been abducted by a Sasquatch during the night while asleep. Similar to the Ostman case, according to him, he was carried an estimated 3 miles through the rugged wilderness, after which he was thrown onto the ground and found that he was surrounded by a group of about 20 hulking creatures. Apparently, there were human bones strewn about the ground with him, which led the trapper to think the beast meant to eat him. The creatures supposedly gathered around him to poke and pull at his clothing, which they seemed genuinely confused by. After some time of this, the beast lost interest somewhat, and the trapper made a run for it, managing to escape their clutches. These strange cases go far past the 1920s. In 1957, a man in a remote village in China claimed to have his daughter screaming out for help and had run to find an 8-foot-tall hairy hominid picking her up and carrying her away. The father bravely grabbed a stick and chased after them to start beating the creature as hard as he could. The startled beast finally dropped the daughter and tried to escape, but purportedly became bogged down in some thick mud. Other armed villagers appeared and proceeded to relentlessly beat the creature to death. It is unclear whatever happened to the story after that or what the creature had intended to do with its prize. An even more recent report comes from 1987. On June 1st of that year, 16-year-old Teresa Breyer and 43-year-old Russell Welch embarked on a camping trip to Sierra National Forest. The two were apparently quite attracted to the Bigfoot phenomenon and had hoped to get a glimpse of the creature themselves. At some point, the two would become separated, and Teresa would vanish without a trace. Authorities would later question Welch, during which time he would claim that his companions had been abducted by Bigfoot. Dubious law enforcement officials would conduct an intense investigation into the disappearance, but found no evidence of foul play, forcing them to let Welch go. Considering that Teresa's body had never been found, it is unclear what happened here. Was she truly kidnapped by a Bigfoot, as Welch claims, or is this a simple case of foul play? It is unknown. Yet another recent case is that of a 48-year-old Jason Richardson, who was on a hike in Northern California in South Lake Tahoe at Mount Talac. At one point during his trek, he claims he heard a guttural sound reminiscent of a human baby voice. Thinking that it was perhaps a real baby, left out alone in the wilderness, he rushed to where he had heard the noise, and then he claims he lost consciousness after being bashed over the head, which was later evident by the blood he found leaking from back there. When he woke up, he says his head was bloodied and hurt badly, and that he found himself in some sort of cavern. Near him were two bear-like creatures which seemed to be communicating in a series of guttural grunts, which sounded strikingly similar to what he had heard before he had lost consciousness. Richardson claimed that the creatures were somewhat human-looking and were covered with thick, red hair, with feet that were even hairier. They stood around 8 to 10 feet in height, and the terrified Richardson wondered if he was perhaps hallucinating. As he tried to move, he realized that his hands and feet had been bound with vines or some other plant material. As the creatures approached, his description becomes even more bizarre. Richardson would describe them as thus: "Then they approached me and I pissed my pants. Literally, I'm not ashamed to say this. I was so fearful, I had no idea if this was it, you know? That's when I saw their heads. Their necks were hairless, and they reminded me of vultures. Their heads had red hair, but also black feathers, or I don't know what it was, but it looked like feathers to me. Their eyes were dark, very dark, and big as they got close to me. The creatures then apparently got quite aggressive, dragging him across the floor and kicking him. They then went off and returned with wood and stones for some unknown purpose. They freed his hands and his feet, but he was too scared to move. The creatures picked him up and tossed him out of the cave, and at one point Richardson claimed that he could feel a rock hit him from behind. He wasted no time in running out of there as fast as his legs can carry him. When he checked his watch, 10 hours had passed since the time had been abducted by his captors. Was this account real, or was Richardson merely hallucinating on some substance, as he had first thought? Nobody knows. In another report from 1962, an Ohio woman claimed to have been kidnapped by a group of Bigfoot after they had repeatedly visited her family home when she was only 12 years old. The creatures had repeatedly approached the home and gotten into the habit of whisking away the girl during the night. On some occasions, the father had barged in with his 12-gauge shotgun to shoot the creatures, which seemed to have little effect. The biggest of the beasts was reportedly a whopping 14 feet tall. She would describe the creature as thus. His hair was long and about the same texture as mine, as I recall. The hair on all of them was about the same shade of brown, like the color of the decomposed wood layer of the forest. I could see skin around his eyes that was tan looking, and where there was facial hair it was more sparse, with glimpses of skin showing through the areas as well. I couldn't make out his neck. His chin was broad, his teeth were about the size of the nail on my middle finger, but they were more flat, and he had a mouthful of them, meaning the width of his bite was wide. His mouth was wide enough to show most of them. His eyes were dark, with some white around them, less so than that of human eyes. They were kind with crow's feet at the outer edges of them. His skin was weathered, like anyone who spent too much time outside, like a farmer. His shoulders were very broad, though I did see his collarbone on the other side, which looked thick compared to a human's. He was muscular and heavily built, but in no way fat. There was an adult female and others who were almost as big as a female, but didn't seem to be young or old. The girl claimed that she was often taken away from her home by the creatures, but she did not remember what transpired during the kidnappings. She only knew that she would be gone for the whole night. At one point, things became more sinister. The girl remembers waking up within a cavern or cave in which the water was dripping from roots emerging from the ground above. At this point, she could see the strange beast surrounding her as she lay upon a slab of rock. She said this of the situation. I wanted badly to scream some more, but I was just too tired to do that anymore. When I relaxed, they all started smiling and laughing. I thought, okay, they could have killed me and eaten me, but they didn't. Evidently, some of them are kind, but then again, I've seen cats play with mice for hours before they kill and eat them. The girl would invariably end up back in her home and was never harmed, but this did little to put the family at ease. The strange creatures would allegedly continue to harass the house, banging on the walls and tapping on the windows, as well as huffing and grunting loudly outside in the night. They would also often communicate with each other outside the home. One of the women would say, the sounds they made were a deep bass laughing, chortling, snickering, and sounds like someone who couldn't pronounce words well. They communicated with each other and with their thoughts just as the male did with me. I had no interaction from any of the younger ones, and the female adult only smiled and sighed heavily when looking at me. For the longest time, the woman kept the family's story secret for fear of being ridiculed, but finally came forth in an effort to get others to share their experiences. She would go on to say of her reasoning to come forward. I hope it brings awareness to the suffering, experiences, and witnesses and allows them to speak openly about what has happened to them. Unless we all speak the truth, the world won't know what's been hidden and still being hidden from us. Do we want further generations to carry on living the same lie? Our world is richer than most people could ever imagine. These are not just creatures. They are quite intelligent and resourceful enough to keep from being caught or killed.
This story was pretty creepy. I mean, I understand why she thought it was maniacal, like for the Bigfoot to take her and put her on a stone slab and some of them were laughing at her and stuff like that. It seems pretty classic horror movie-ish creepy, but she wasn't hurt. So she wasn't actually hurt, she wasn't harmed, but just because she wasn't hurt doesn't mean other people like her weren't hurt. And what's up with the strange stone slab? Were they doing some kind of ritual with her, or some kind of magical ritual with a child, a female child? They almost seem like regular people, like a lonely man living in the woods, abducting a woman, raping her, keeping her hostage. He was shocked about the fire starting, like he never seen fire before, and he was attracted to a human female. It almost seems like some of these beings, or Bigfoot, or whatever that you want to call them, are lost from another time, like lost people from another time, or a more primitive tribe. Like they don't know how to make fire. They don't know how to make tools or clothing. The first story with the Albert Ostman, they did weave blankets with moss in them, and they were quite comfortable. He said they looked really comfortable. So obviously they know how to build and create, but I guess they don't need to create clothing or anything like that because they're covered in hair. I found it quite interesting that the Bigfoot, or the hairy man that was listening to the music, got really upset when it stopped working, and he went and stole batteries because he understood that batteries are what's needed for it to work. So that shows a level of intelligence, able to break down how things work, like technology, and he stole things to make it work again. And it had the wherewithal, their intelligence, to know that she could not survive the winter without warmer clothes, so the creature stole clothes for her, concerned for her well-being. All in all, these stories are quite strange. I don't understand the reasoning for the abduction. They're obviously different for each one. For the Albert Ostman story, I feel like he was abducted more of a curiosity or trying to make first contact. Put yourself in their shoes. You want to make first contact with a being and kind of get on equal terms with them, right? So they can understand you. How are you going to do that? It's almost impossible. Like if I was to find a little person and try to talk to it, it wouldn't understand what I was saying unless there's some kind of weird psychic connection that we could do. So logically speaking, you'd want to kidnap it. You'd want to steal the creature and have a conversation with it. Like I could see somebody, I'm not saying that I would do this, but I could see the logic of like wanting to imprison one. Like I capture a little person, I put it in a cage or put it in a jail cell and try to make friends with it that way because it's forced to be around me in that aspect. And I feel like with the Albert Ostman story, maybe the elder or the adult male Bigfoot thought it would be a good idea to try to befriend a human because he definitely wasn't being aggressive. And the other ones seemed more thuggish, like bringing him into the cave, those weird hairy creatures with the no hair on their neck. I don't even know if all these stories are Bigfoot, but there are probably many different types of humanoids. And we don't know if these people are from different realms, different realities, from different periods of time, maybe a different evolution of the human tree. Maybe some kind of time anomaly happened where. And sometimes some of these Bigfoot stories seem more like Neanderthal or primitive human type stories than actual Bigfoot. Because I don't think all these stories were of Bigfoot. But it goes to show that who knows what could be happening? Who knows if there's time distortions? Who knows if humans get thrown into the distant past sometimes and there's spooky stories of people that look like us from another people in the future or in the past. Like imagine we look like this right now, humanity, but imagine if we're thrown into the future, like a million years, and humans evolved to look even different than what we do look like now. So we look totally different a million years from now. And imagine if you got stuck in a time anomaly and you got thrown into the future, and the people of the future, like millions of years in the future, thought you were a monster or some kind of scary cryptid. It's really hard to say. We don't know what all the variants of Bigfoot are. And if you remember one of my stories from interdimensional predators, there are things that look human that hunt people. Where the guy walked through the portal and got grabbed. You might want to recap that video if you guys haven't seen it. As I said, I'm back. I gotta look up how to do Patreon and all this other stuff. It takes time to educate myself, and I just been focusing on getting on the habit of getting videos out. So I haven't even been promoting my videos. So like, share, subscribe, share my videos in paranormal groups. Try to get the word out there for my vids. That way I have incentive to keep creating more And the more people who view my stories, the more stories that'll get emailed to me and the more I could share with you. Anyway, guys, until next time, this is Kituvitoak signing out. And a lot of people can't say my name, but it's Kituvitoak. Kituvitoak. Everyone calls me Q. My name's too hard. And yes, I did get a lot of tattoos. So I'm all tatted up. Anyway, guys, till next time, look forward to more videos, all right?